Right, good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us here to hear about how the SEND and AP reforms are going 1 year on. It's quite busy in here, so if everybody could just make sure if people come in, there's plenty of room for them to sit down, and just a reminder, it is being broadcast in the room next door as well, if anybody needs to leave and go into there at any point. So I'm Samantha Booth, Chair and Chief Reporter at Schools Week. I'm joined here by Mark Vickers, CEO at REACh Academies, and Amanda Allard, Director at the Council for Disabled Children, who are going to be explaining how the piloting of the SEND reforms is going 1 year on. So first, I thought I'd just ask the question, who are the REACh Consortium that you guys are a part of, and what is your role within that?
Thanks very much, Sam, and really good to be here today and to be having this conversation with Amanda. So we thought we'd just start by just explaining a little bit about the REACh Consortium, so you're clear about that. So you're probably aware when the SEND and AP implementation improvement plan was published, the DfE committed to a series of testing, a programme of testing the reforms, and they went out to secure a delivery partner to run that programme for them, and it was an 18-month piece of work. So REACh stands for Reaching Excellence and Ambition for All Children. That consortium is made up of 4 organisations: PA Consulting, Empower, Council for Disabled Children, which is obviously Amanda leads, and REACh Academies, which is the MAT, Multi-Academy Trust, that I lead, and we focus particularly on the AP element of that work. Key component of the work is to work really closely with the 9 what's called CPPs, Change Programme Partnerships. Those 9 areas coincide with the 9 academy regions. Each of those partnerships is made up of between 2 and 3 local authorities, so there are 32 local authorities that are involved in that programme. And the general sense behind it is to see what is working, what isn't working in very different contexts, and I'm really pleased that the LAs that were selected represent quite a wide range of contexts and starting points, and I know that was a deliberate decision to get the true learning from the programme. So, Amanda, would you like to just say a little bit about your what's working and a little bit about the programme itself from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. And again, as Mark says, really great to be here. Fabulous view. Sun's coming out, and I feel like I should be on Strictly. So, or possibly a musical theatre. Very posh headset. I've just got a few slides that I'll talk to you before Mark and I go back to our fireside chat. And I don't know whether, do people get the slides if they want them?
Good question. Yeah, Hannah says yes.
Yeah, okay. So just so that you don't kind of have to take notes and you can kind of, if there are some key bits about the programme that you can take away with you. So this is just the theory of change behind the programme. So the idea basically is that if you meet needs at the earliest point of presentation, then you reduce costs in the system, that you prevent need escalating and you reduce the need for higher cost specialist placements. And one of the reasons that the Council for Disabled Children is so keen on this theory of change and why we agreed to support the department is because we believe that actually the more we can do to support children in universal settings, the less we other them and the less we add self-esteem issues to some of the other educational issues or life issues that they might be experiencing. So that's the theory of change, and that's what the SEND and AP programme is fundamentally trying to work out is does this theory of change work, and do the core components that DfE have put together to test whether or not the change programme works actually work. And I think one of the really positive things about working with DfE on this programme is that, and another one of the reasons that we agreed to be a part of the consortium, is that there is a genuine testing. You will all remember, government programmes before where they pilot things and the rollout, starts before the pilot finishes and we've got any sense of that learning. This is not like that. This is a genuine testing, and we have, as Mark referred to, we've got learning coming out of the programme through an approach called rapid cycle testing, where we're sort of gathering data in real time. So, I'm not going to go through these. Mark explains sort of the regions and everything, and that's just a list for you of those local authorities who are involved. Hopefully, if your local authority is involved, you know. But one of the challenges, I think, that has that there has been in the programme is where the focus has started and whether or not local authorities and their partners have been sufficiently able to engage with schools as a key stakeholder. So these are the elements of the change programme plan. So there is the SEND and AP partnership. So this is kind of the key critical idea. We are not talking about schools, we're not talking about local authorities, we are talking about partnerships and key partners in that local area who need to come together. Somebody once said to me, and it's absolutely true, SEND is the most systemy system that there is. So to tackle a systemy system and to bring about that theory of change, you have got to get all of those actors on board. So that's the SEND and AP partnership. They have to produce a local area inclusion plan that sets out what they will do in order to effectively include children with SEND in their local area. There's a data dashboard. There's a real focus. I mean, we might argue about whether it was sufficiently early, but there is a real focus on ordinarily available provision and being really clear about supporting schools to understand how they can be more inclusive, the standards which would be expected of mainstream schools. And we're also really pushing, as part of that, the idea that actually that's not schools on their own, but, you know, what should be ordinarily available from the health system and the social care system without children needing an education, health and care plan. So there is the three-tier alternative provision system, which Mark's going to talk a bit more, well, not a bit more, a lot more. We may struggle to shut him up about in a minute. There's early language support for every child. That isn't in every local authority. It's generally speaking in one of the change programme partners in the 9 regions. There's some other elements which aren't being specifically tested within the reforms, but are part of the government's approach. And I won't read them out but I also understand you won't be able to see them, which is why I'm really pleased that you're getting the slides. And then there is a reformed EHC plan process. The department have co-produced a standard template for EHC plans that they are testing in local areas. And the idea behind that is, you know, imagine, especially if you're in a special school, if you are, you won't have to imagine, you know, you might have, 9 or 10 different local authority EHC plan templates that you have to manage. That cuts that out. Also, obviously, for parents, if you move local authority, it means you don't necessarily have to start your plan again from the beginning. Multi-agency panels, that's basically, how you decide as a local area who pays for what. I mean, most of them have them, but this is kind of working out how they should run better. Strengthen mediation, how do we support parents better before they go to tribunal? And advisory tailored lists is the idea that a local authority should be able to provide for parents a list of schools that is appropriate to meet their child's needs when they're thinking about more specialist provision. Now, I have some lovely animations for you that set out for you which ones of these are going down well and which ones are going down like a bucket of cold sick. So in the bucket of cold sick area is strength and mediation and standardised EHC plan format and advisory tailored lists. The reason for the slightly different reasons, EHC plan format is really just about, I think essentially, people aren't keen on change, and quite often local areas have put an awful lot of effort into co-producing their own template. And also, I mean, I know from some of the training that we do for local authorities and local areas, they've had quite a lot of training and they've kind of used that sort of workshops to develop the process that sits around the plan, and they kind of just feel like everybody's chucked that pile of cards up in the air and is saying, oh no, use this. But actually, people who understand the law really like the plan. Parents like the plan. So this kind of may be a mixed tick. And the strength and mediation and the advisory tailored list is really about people feeling that, if that theory of change is right, then why are we focusing all at the specialist end? Why is all of that kind of change capacity up there thinking about that? And also, there is a bit of an issue with, until we get the theory of change moving in the right direction and us in a position of meeting more children's needs in mainstream provision, all of the special schools are full. Most of the APs are full, as Mark will touch on later. So to some extent, there is a danger that an advisory tailored list will be a bit useless, because it will tell you provision that the local authority can't promise that you can have. So that is a kind of whistle-stop tour through the change programme elements. And I'm now going to hand back to Mark, who's going to tell you a bit more about that AP box.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks for going through that. And it's reassuring to know that the piece I'm going to be talking about now is not in that particular bucket, I have to say. So just as an explainer, a bit of a reminder, I know obviously yourselves in the room will know lots about this already, that the proposed three-tiered model for alternative provision is very much predicated on the notion of a continuum of practice, inclusive practice, and predicated on the belief that all young people have the absolute right to be on a high-quality continuum, but all points on that continuum have to be high quality and joined up. And I think if you're just doing a reflection now, and you think about where you might be working and what it's like in your localities, I might be describing something that's utopian or is partially working or might be fully working depending on where you are. And that three-tiered approach is very much around tier one, that targeted support in mainstream schools, that early intervention, and the role that alternative provision can play in supporting individual young people, supporting schools, particularly about building their capacity to be able to work with young people perhaps in a different way, because the ways that have been working previously haven't worked, and they're considering a permanent exclusion, or there's a whole number of suspensions that are building up over time, meaning that young person is not being successful at that school at that particular time. And it's interesting because there's a lot of interest in this at the moment. I mean, at Olive Academies, we work across quite a large locality east of England and in London, and we've got quite a nuanced approach to how we support and approach outreach as a strategy and an intervention. And it is much more of an intervention now than it ever was, and I'm pleased to hear that. And the national network that I chair around AP and SEND MAT leaders, there's definitely more interest now than there ever was before. And I suspect that some of that is because of increased needs, but some of it is also because of what's set out in the improvement plan around the three-tiered approach. Second tier is what's called time-limited placements, shorter term placements where young people need to be in a strong AP setting. They might be dual registered, and increasingly that seems to be the case, and I'm pleased about that because it keeps that link with mainstream schools, which is really important around the flow of information that's required around supporting a young person. And the concept there is predicated on the belief that those young people, the high quality AP, can work with them, understand their needs as quickly as possible, and support them, and potentially branching out into the broader kind of parent and carer piece around that as well, with the hope and expectation that those young people will be reintegrated into a fresh mainstream school in partnership with that mainstream school to give them the best chance of succeeding in a mainstream school. Because no matter how good an AP setting is, they can't be all things to all people. They are a much more specialist intervention. They're not trying to be, I don't think they should be trying to be a small version of a mainstream school. They have the same expectations as a mainstream school, particularly around engagement and high quality curriculum. Perhaps touch on that a bit more, Sam, when we come to the questions, that's fine. And obviously it's predicated on the notion that the schools will want to work in partnership to support a reintegration as well, because it won't work if they don't. But of course that's only describing some young people that are in AP. Others need much more long-term placements. That's the transitional placements, the third tier. Generally that will mean that those young people will stay in that setting until such time as they can be transitioned successfully into work-based learning or post-16 programs. And for some, after a period of time, they will then reintegrate into a mainstream school. But that does depend a little bit on the context. I mentioned about high interest and demand. It's really interesting that so many of the CPP areas are really interested in kind of understanding a bit more about where they are as a baseline for alternative provision, really focusing on vision and purpose, commissioning models and ways of working. And I've been talking to Olive Academies as part of the REACh programme around support for that, around that baseline in particular. Hope that's helpful, just to sort of explain, quick whistle-stop tour of what's happening with the AP element of this. But Amanda, you mentioned about rapid cycle evaluations and learning. it'd be useful just to sort of touch on what's coming out so far that might be helpful for the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have been sort of pulling data out from the sites and kind of learning from them what's been going on in real time. So a lot of the learning, it's probably what you would expect, which is that those local areas who had who put capacity in, so put in a senior project manager, have got further. Who knew? The other thing is that I think, generally speaking, in terms of where local areas have started, they've started on the local area inclusion plans and the SEND and AP partnerships. So they've started on the processy bits. So there is less learning to date about those specific reforms, but we have got some learning out of that. So in terms of those kind of SEND and AP partnerships, some really kind of positive things. I think although people had, existing partnerships, that what they've been able to do through the reforms is increase the membership of those and make them more effective. And if we go back, if we think about that kind of system, that is really, really important. So, as ever, we do a lot of work with local areas to help them with their SEND improvement in general. And what we always find is, don't make more work for yourself. Don't have a SEND and AP sort of strand of work and a, SEND improvement strand of work. It's one piece of work, so those areas that have kind of really understood that and have got an integrated approach, because as Mark says, some of these areas, it's a really wide range. So there are areas that are struggling, and have done poorly in their CQC and Ofsted inspections. So they've got a SEND improvement plan. So unless they're kind of thinking about those two things together, they really will trip up. And I'm just aware of time, so I'll sort of probably finish there. Improve governance as well, and I'll just say just one thing, which is we'll carry on doing that. We've asked the department, so where it's helpful for local areas, because we've had questions from local authorities about we're thinking about changing our EHC plan template. When's this one going to be finishing testing? So we have had, I hope, a solid commitment from DFE that as we get that learning back, if things are working, then actually we'll start to be able to share them. Because I know it's a little bit frustrating at the moment. The department haven't wanted things to be shared outside of the change programme areas because they don't want people thinking, oh, well, this is it now. So, yeah, so absolutely. And you were just going to kind of do a little bit of a deep dive into what it might feel like within a school, weren't you, Mark, for the audience?
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. I'll just, obviously conscious of time, want to leave enough time for questions as well, so I can come back to this. But just some sort of overarching thoughts for myself around how a system, a school system or a MAT system or an LA system can really respond to some of these challenges at the moment. And it, for me, comes down to leadership every time. So we need to have the absolute buy-in of the leaders at the very top of those organisations, understanding that SEND and AP is everybody's business. And I know that's the key message in obviously in the improvement plan. But without that, you'll have lots and lots of brilliant people doing lots and lots of great work. But if it's not coordinated and integrated and part of a system and part of a key strategy, it's only going to be partially successful. And that's particularly relevant at the moment where things are difficult because of increasing needs, demands and challenges around resources particularly. We're finding across the network and at Olive Academies that successful as we are with working with young people, it's the hardest we've ever found around getting schools to want to reintegrate young people who have always reintegrated previously because they're under pressure, not because they don't really want to. It's just that actually they're struggling with their own sort of challenges and demands. So it has to be a whole school approach without a doubt. And then there has to be a thread running through from the strategic plan into the department middle leadership plan so that it can make a massive difference. And then you can start to think about understanding what the needs of young people are, and that's where SENCOs and leaders with SEND have their role to play without a doubt. So that's just a really quick couple of key overarching points. I could talk for a lot longer about that bit, but I'm conscious of time.
Oh, thanks so much,
Thanks,
both.
Sam.
That was really helpful. I've just got one question, if that's all right, before we open it up, if you don't mind. I just wondered what the timescales are, and
Oh, I was
if we're
supposed to cover that.
are we on track? Is it slightly behind schedule? And
no,
then
no.
will
Do you want more of an answer than that?
if possible, and will the change programme results be published as you go along for the sector to see how it's working, or will it be like an end evaluation, if you know what I mean?
So in terms of the timescales, so our delivery partner contract runs until March 25. Obviously, there is a general election in the middle of there, but given the size of the problem and the fact that it's not going to go away, I think we're reasonably confident that a new government are unlikely to just kind of chuck it all out and start again. I think they will. There might be some questions, but let's not look at that. Let's look at what we know. So what we know is that we will test these things for definite until March 25, with some of them, and then the department will have to make a decision about whether or not they want testing to go on longer. Some of them will require legislative change, and obviously that will not happen until there's a new parliament. And then there might be some things like, so for instance, with the EHC plan format, if actually that seems to be working well, then what would happen is the department would give people the opportunity to adopt it. None of it, there are things like that and sort of advisory tailored lists that cannot be sort of mandated ahead of. But actually, if they're really working, and quite often, what we find is, the law only goes so far, and lots of people don't understand the law, and it's quite complicated. So actually, we spend a lot of our life at the Council for Disabled Children helping people to understand the law. So actually, we can do lots to improve the SEND system from that learning. In terms of the sharing of the learning, we've been a little bit frustrated with the department, haven't we, Mark? I mean, because it's interesting. We know that actually the EHC plan template has got out there because, somebody's been naughty and shared it. And we knew that would happen. But that we do have, anyone, I'm just trying to think how to get that out to people, but go on the REACh website. There's a REACh page on the Council for Disabled Children website. And there is a newsletter that you can sign up to, and that will give you all of the information that we're allowed to share. At the moment, the rapid cycle testing information is just going to the department. One of the things we are hoping to do, and sorry, this is a really long-winded answer, one of the things we are hoping to do is not sat there actually, but that sat there are some researchers that also work with the Council for Disabled Children, but as part of the programme that they work on called REACh, we do love an acronym, which is Research and Improvement for SEND Excellence. There are some moderated case studies which basically showcase good practice examples. So the plan is that as learning comes through, if things seems to be working and they're robust, then we'll put them through that effective practice framework and then share them that way.
You know roughly how far behind schedule you are with the change programme?
9 months.
About 9 months, and that's down to particularly the start-up phase. I mean, the DfE obviously been very open about this. It took a lot longer than was anticipated. Obviously, coordinating that number of local authorities into change programme partnerships took longer than probably anticipated.
We could possibly blame Liz Truss for that as well.
I'm sure a lot of people can. Okay, I would like to open up to a few questions, if that's all right. Yeah, if we could go to this gentleman here and then also the lady in the blue top at the back. I'll take two at a time, if that's all right.
Hello, hi, yeah. Right, can you hear me? Yeah. What's your understanding of how many hours that an AP can provide, and the difference between substantial and the legal hours of 18? And I ask this because we've recently had a visit from HMI, and all our managers and directors were cautioned, and none of our young people did over 18 hours. And we've also been told that all the APs that have been visited in our area have got to become independent schools. Now, this is obviously it's quite scary for us to be cautioned when we were commissioned and we've gone through procurement to deliver under 18 hours in our area. Thank you.
And then just the lady in the back. Yeah, there we go.
Thank you. Amanda, you mentioned the theory of change. Could you say some more about that? And also, last July, the CCGs changed to integrated care boards, and we've heard nothing about, from the department or any other delivery partners, of how the new integrated care boards fit into the EHCP process or anything around that.
Okay, so obviously we're going to divide the questions up, so it feels like a natural fit there, really. So that's a complicated question, which takes quite a bit of answering, and I'm happy I'll part answer it, but then stay behind afterwards to have a more detailed conversation if it's helpful. Because alternative provision means so many different things to so many different people. It's such an umbrella term for, it could be at one end of the continuum, a motor mechanic who works for one afternoon a week with one pupil, and the rest of the time they're at mainstream school, all the way up to a full-time offer in an AP setting, an academy or a maintained school. And obviously Ofsted are having a much closer look at this now than at any point previously, because there's been ongoing concerns around the use of AP. Is it being used for the right reasons? Is it being seen as an intervention? How many hours are they being provided alongside what else is on offer? Because there are a number of examples nationally where there are young people that the only offer they get is a very limited offer. Could be less than 5 hours of provision on a site, which might be providing good quality, but it's not part of a whole offer. So my understanding is there isn't a hard and fast, it's X number of hours for AP, but it is about the total number of hours across a piece. And of course, if you've got young people that might be engaged in AP part-time as part of a phased intervention plan, so what used to be known and still is sometimes as a part-time timetable, that's fraught with all sorts of system and kind of monitoring expectations about how that's played out and what the leader's role are in that. So there's a lot there to unpack, and I'm not surprised that Ofsted, when they're looking at in their area inspections, are looking really closely at this, but looking at not just one. They shouldn't be looking at just one part of it. They should be looking at the whole provision for that young person. But I'll talk more specifically afterwards. That's fine.
So absolutely, the change from clinical commissioning groups to integrated care boards has yet again not been our friend. Those of you with long memories will remember that the NHS decided to reorganise at the same time as the Children and Families Act. So I'm sure that they plan it just to upset me. But good. So that's the bad news, and obviously we have had an awful lot of change in the NHS, and also for integrated care boards themselves, but also for NHS England, significant cuts. So actually, in terms of the NHS always struggles to remember that all age does include children. But that makes that even more challenging. On the good news front, we have got a real recognition of the importance of SEND within integrated care boards, and they have to have an exec lead. The other thing that has happened, which is really good news, and it might sound sort of insignificant and processy, but this is a big deal within the NHS. Children and children's waiting times for autism assessment and for therapies has hit the planning guidance. What that means is that ICBs have got to get those waiting times down. Now, they will struggle to do that with the current workforce that they have, so they will need to work more closely with schools, I think. This is what I'm telling them. And to think about how they support schools. And I think, our vision, what's missing from that theory of change for me is what will stop that theory of change working is insufficient input from health partners. Because actually you won't stop that drive, that request for an education, health and care plan if those parents don't understand how they get therapy provision, how they get that specialist health input at a universal level and at a targeted level. So there are some really great models out there, and they're on our effective practice evidence framework of people working really well together in local areas to get that done. So we can do this, and there are really good ways of doing it. We just need to make sure we get the message out there and make sure that schools do feel supported and held around managing issues which, you know, may not be your bread and butter. But actually, with relatively little support, maybe you could manage really, really effectively.
Any more questions at all? Yep. Lady in the striped top here, and then right at the back. Yeah.
Thank you.
I work in a small independent charity-based school on the Essex-Suffolk border, which kind of focuses on kind of holistic education. And we do a lot of multidisciplinary work, drawing on services. I'm the SENCO. And what I've noticed is there's a massive distinction between the provision that's available, AP provision, access to services in Suffolk, as there is in Essex. There doesn't seem to be a great deal of sharing across local education authorities about what is working and what isn't working. And we see an increasing number of parents bringing children out of mainstream education because they reject the offer that's been made to them by their local authority. They don't want to put them in that PRU or in that behavioural unit. They're scared to put their children there because they're then not offered a place back into mainstream education. So they're making massive decisions to pull their child out of mainstream education and put them in an independent school. We can't support them because the SEND provision is me. And then we find ourselves in a position where they're fighting, appealing, not being offered a place with us, small independent school. How do we link up the services that are being offered? Because what we have, if we've got a child in independent education, they're not allowed to financially access local authority. They can't access it. I can't go to Suffolk LEA and say, right, okay, you've got an AP provision there, can I access it? They have to pay. But that child should have a right to access to education that's at an adequate level, independent of whether their parents pay for independent education or not. So where can we bridge that crossover?
I'm just conscious of the time, so I'm so sorry we won't get to your question, but if you're happy to come up at the end and discuss it. Very brief answers.
Okay, so local area inclusion plans should be kind of thinking about some of those issues. The other thing in terms of that sort of postcode lottery that you were talking about is that, you know, and I didn't really touch on that, but as the learning comes out of the programme, DFE will be using that to start constructing national standards. So obviously expectations around ordinarily available provision are part of those national standards, but they do go wider. So that should start to help address, you know, what we always refer to as that kind of postcode lottery.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, your question, really good question, sort of brings some colour, some life to what I said at the beginning around the utopian view of wanting to get to a place where there is a distinguishable continuum of provision within a locality, and clearly at the moment that's not fully the case, or not the case in certain areas at all. Just to give a little bit of hope at the end of this, because where REACh Academies works, we work across Suffolk, Cambridgeshire, we do some support in Norfolk, we work in Thurrock, and we work in Havering. And I'm really encouraged by the fact that there's a regional group for SEND, and it's been in place for quite some time, and that's an LA regional group. But there's very recently an AP group that's been established, which is all the leads for alternative provision from the 10 or 11 local authorities in that area, starting to sort of share what the challenges are, but also what some of the solutions are. So it's early days, and some of this is big systemic change. It's going to take quite some time. Otherwise, we're just left with exactly what you just described going on indefinitely, which can't be the case.
Thank you so much. I could talk about this all day with you, but we've run over. But if we could just give a round of applause to Mark and Amanda, please.